The fear of urban sprawl gobbling up Ontario's prime farmland prompted an era of land use planning such as the Greenbelt and the Places to Grow Act. But a new report argues that Ontario's efforts to protect farmland are both unnecessary and costly for rural citizens. For a closer look, we're joined via Skype from North Bay, Ontario by Gord Miller, ecologist and environmental policy analyst. He served for 15 years as the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. And here in studio, the report's author, there's Glenn Fox. He is professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph. Gord and Glenn, it's good to have you on TVO tonight. Let us actually, Glenn, I'm going to start with you because you recently co-authored something for the Fraser Institute in which you said the following. We estimate that farmland area in Ontario decreased by 39.33% over the period from 1951 to 2011, while cropland area actually increased by 3.29%. This implies a much slower rate of decrease in farmland area in the post-1980 period. And cropland area, which in our view is a more meaningful measure related to food production, has increased. Let's just start by figuring out how you came to that conclusion.
Well, one of the goals of our study initially was to address the question, how much agricultural land is there in Ontario, and how has that changed over time? Two economists at the University of Western Ontario, Professors Frankena and Sheffman, did a study on this question in 1980, and so 35 years later, we wanted to revisit that question. Now, we've used the term agricultural land, which there are two measures of agricultural land which are available. One is farmland, and one is cropland. And many discussions have focused on farmland area, and we think that cropland area is a more useful measure of agricultural land area.
What's the difference between the two?
Cropland area, as the name suggests, is the land that's used to grow the things that you would, if you were driving by, you'd recognize as crops. So corn, soybeans, winter wheat. It also includes fruits and vegetables, the types of active plant growth activities that people, I think, would associate with agricultural land. Farmland includes all of the cropland, plus it adds in some other things.
Such as?
It includes woodlots, so forested and treed areas that exist on farms. It includes wetlands. It includes the land area occupied by farmhouses, farm buildings, the laneways, the fence rows, headlands, the land that separates fields from one another.
You think, I gather, it's inappropriate to consider that when considering the whole issue of agricultural?
Well, we think that most people, when they think about agricultural land, probably in their minds visualize something that we think corresponds more closely to cropland than agriculture, than farmland.
Okay. We know, for example, Dalton McGuinty, his government, I suspect Gord Miller as well, are very high on the Greenbelt and the fact that so much of that area has been protected for future generations, and I know the McGuinty government considers that one of its greatest ever accomplishments. Mm-hmm. Based on your metrics, are they entitled to feel that good about it all?
Well, one of the things that we did was we charted from 1951 through to 2011 or 2014, depending on the data that we had available, what was happening to cropland area at a provincial scale, at a regional scale, and then we were able to do one comparison of inside the Greenbelt versus outside the Greenbelt or the rest of Ontario. And what we found was that there was a different trend for cropland area inside the Greenbelt, and in fact it was declining. Whereas at the provincial level, it was stable or increasing slightly since 1951.
Do you understand that? The crop production in the Greenbelt was declining relative to the rest of the province?
I didn't say crop production, I said cropland area.
Cropland area, okay.
Had a different trend than the province. The province, as I said, it was stable or increasing, and in fact, it seemed to have been decreasing within the Greenbelt area.
Okay. Let me, at this point then, go to Gord Miller in North Bay. You've heard what he's had to say about the distinction between cropland and agricultural land or farmland. And I want to just pick up on something there, Gordon. Tell me what you think.
Oh, sure. I mean, Glenn, you left off pasture land because pasture land was included in the definition of farmland. It's not in cropland. And of course, If you were driving in the country in the 1970s around St. George, you'd go by a farm with a big harvester solid that said H.O. Miller and Son. That's my uncle's dairy farm. If you drive by there today, there's no dairy farm. There's just a sea of corn or soybeans, depending on the year. And of course, I think by farmland includes pasture land. And back in the early days, the 50s, 60s, 70s, we had a lot bigger dairy area. We had a lot of cattle. And those are pasture lands. They're farmlands. And so I think that skews the data. And I would argue, if you look at your data and your report, you'll say the numbers you have, the increase even in cropland, even if we talk about cropland, there was a 24% decrease in the central area of agricultural Ontario, and a 30% increase over that review period in southern Ontario. Well, we didn't invent 30% more farmland. What we did is we switched from pasture to cash cropping, and for a while how profitable cash cropping is today compared to how it was in, say, the 70s. So I think that, right off the bat, I'm having some trouble with this central argument. I think that, one other point, if I can make, is that in the area of, let's say, what we call the white belt, which is the part in the large amount of land inside the green belt area that was left, it's currently agricultural, but it's not yet developed. It's all in crops, because, of course, the developers who own it keep it in crops to get the tax concession that you get on farmland. And so that artificially keeps it. It's sort of, to look at it now, you say, well, that's all cropland for now, until the houses grow.
Gord, if that's the case, if you believe that the study that Glenn is responsible for, in your words, skews the data, how do you think that affects his conclusion?
Well, you want to hear the odd thing here of this discussion, is that if you go down to the end of the conclusion that Glenn makes, I agree with him 100%, but for different reasons. I think we both end up with the same conclusion about what we have to do about preserving what we value on the landscape of southern Ontario. I arrive at it from an ecological view of the landscape and management of the landscape. I don't have as much sympathy for landowners and the economic models. I'm not the economist, Glenn is. However, I think, Glenn, I absolutely agree with you in the end that if we have for the key valued lands, that where there are woodlands, wetlands, or even lands we want to keep in food production for other reasons, ecological reasons, for hay production, for endangered species and such things, society should put up the money and pay the private landowners to keep the land that way, and that's what you conclude, and I agree with you.
Glenn, have you skewed the data, as Gord suggests?
Well, I didn't get quite to the end of my answer in your previous question, and I was certainly going to include pasture land as one of the differences between cropland and farmland. There's an additional category, Gord, which is if there are wetlands on the farm, they would be included in farmland but not included in cropland. And of course, the question has been asked of us since we completed the study, well, if you, as Gord has experienced with the family farm, I used to farm near Hamilton, or I worked for a farmer near Hamilton, and the cropland where I used to grow barley when I was a teenager, and in my early 20s now grows a Canadian Tire and a Value Village, and it's not growing barley anymore. So I can remember, as Gord can, land that used to be cropland that isn't. So it then begs the question, well, where's the additional cropland coming from in Ontario? And our study we didn't have the resources in our study to drill down and get into a lot of detail on that.
But you can appreciate the fact that when people drive by and they see, wait a second, when I was a kid, that was cropland, and now it's a Canadian Tire, or now it's a whatever, Home Depot, you can appreciate why people would come to the conclusion that our cropland is disappearing, right?
Absolutely.
But you say it's not.
And so one of the purposes that we had in our study was to take that anecdotal evidence, which most of us who have lived in an urban or suburban area for any length of time in Ontario have seen, as Gord attests, and certainly from my experience. But one of the critics of our study said, doesn't Professor Fox ever look out the window? Which was a fair criticism. And my response to that is, yes, I do look out the window, but there's no window that I can look out of that lets me see all of Ontario. And so we have to look at the data, we have to look at these estimates in order to get a picture at a broader scale. Because maybe the anecdotes at the local level, maybe they extrapolate to the province or maybe they don't. Our data would suggest that they don't if we are concerned about total cropland area in the province.
In which case, Gord, let me ask you a very open-ended question. Should Ontarians have the right to do what they want with their land when they want?
Well, yeah, okay. Let's answer that in context because sure, basically that's sort of libertarian philosophy. To a certain extent, that's true. However, what the study we're talking about is economics and the loss of value in the land. And what is the value of land? What is the development thing? I strongly disagree with many economists when they talk about, well, there's development rights and value in the land. That development right only accrues when the province allows for builds of water and sewage facilities, highways, and all these other infrastructure things which impart development value to the land. So it's not inherent. The inherent value of the land is what you can do on your own land, which is farming or logging or whatever it is. But all these other values of becoming a millionaire for selling off to some big developer, that didn't come from your land inherently. That came because the province made it possible to service that land. So with transportation and other servicing. So the caveat I put on is it, should you have a right to do what you want on your own land? Yeah, within your own land. But if the province is trying to protect and to develop bigger infrastructure and provide greater facilities and benefits on a landscape level, you've got to work within their rules.
Glenn, would you agree that that sounded a bit actually like Barack Obama? You didn't build that. There was a little echo of that there. But would you agree that the value of a land is certainly improved by public sector investment that goes near it, such as highways, sewers, whatever other infrastructure, and therefore you have to take all of that into account?
There are many factors that influence the value of land in general and agricultural land in particular. Our study wasn't so much about land prices as it was about land availability and the implications of what the data tell us on total land availability. Gord pointed out that he agrees with the conclusions that we came to at the end of our report.
He did say that.
And as I point out to my students, Gord's an ecologist, I'm an economist. It's not a coincidence that those two words sound the same. They came from the same root. And Linnaeus, the father of ecology, described his book as the economy of nature. So there's a lot of commonality. And one of the main conclusions to which Gord has alluded in our study is the need that if society, if the political process determines that there are certain values that it attaches to rural lands, whether it's wetlands or woodlots or endangered species habitat, then the fair way to do that is to compensate the landowners so that they're not left holding the bag in a disproportionate way. Well, and part of the argument that Gord makes on property rights grounds would be a pretty controversial argument in a lot of rural areas in Ontario where farmers don't share that view. Rural landowners don't share that view of property rights.
Gord, you say you know that. How come?
Oh, when I was commissioner, when I'd make those points, I ran into the farming community members who believe that their land has intrinsic development. They want to farm houses and retire. In some cases, that's all right. In other pieces of land, that's not in the best interest of society or the ecological landscape. So I think, if I can make, one more point back here is that there's a big difference of a paradigm between Glenn and I, a very civil one, but I mean, because of the way we're trained, the way we think, I look at the land as a landscape, as a living landscape interacting the geology. I mean, the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Act was put in place to preserve a landform because of its hydrological and ecological function, not because of its agricultural economic benefit. So it's how you look at the problem or the issue of managing the land that gives you the perspective and leads you to what policies are good or not good. I don't really have, as I say, I agree with Glenn's conclusions about intrinsic value of people's land, how we have to pay for it if we want it. However, I'm a little nervous about these economic studies and how they might be used by the likes of the Fraser Institute, which is an organization that I don't always find myself on the same side of.
Well, do you think, Gord, that rural Ontarians are disproportionately paying a price for province-wide land use policies that may more directly adversely affect them?
Here's where to be very specific. They're paying unnecessarily for wetlands, yes. They're paying for woodlots, and they shouldn't be. Otherwise, there is a managed forest a program for some woodlots, but nonetheless, they're disproportionately paying if they are preserving large old growth woodlots, and they're paying for endangered species protection, all of which I think they should be compensated for. I don't think they should be compensated for when we change or we hold their land in agricultural zoning and they say, oh, but I could make $5 million if I had sold to the land developer. I don't think that's our problem. But a wetland, a forest, endangered species, absolutely. Those are things that we as a society need to pay those guys to protect.
You agree with that?
With much of what Gord said, I do agree. I think one of the, I suppose, criticisms that we had of the policy approach that's been taken in Ontario is that we have a very broadly focused approach. And we think that a narrowly focused approach, if what we're concerned about is wetlands, then let's focus on wetland protection, not agricultural land protection, and let's compensate landowners for maintaining the wetlands that exist on their farm. If we're focused on woodlot protection, if we're focused on endangered species protection, a more narrowly focused policy with compensation for landowners, we would seem to be more effective and also more fair.
Okay, let me follow up with this. Let's just say, certainly in the 416 and in a lot of what's immediately around the 416, it's been turned into subdivisions. How have we managed to maintain a relatively stable amount of cropland in spite of that?
Well, what's happened is that cropland, as Gord has pointed out, has come into production in other areas. As I said, we didn't have the resources in our study to get into a detailed analysis of the sources. I think Gord is correct that one area where cropland has been expanded is onto what had been formerly pasture land. And there are a number of reasons for that happening. One is farmers have made massive investments in what's called tile drainage. And tile drainage involves installing perforated plastic pipes under fields so that in the spring in particular, excess moisture can be drained away from the field because without that happening, maybe tillage operations aren't possible, germination is affected, yields are affected.
So that brings new land
and so
into
that
the
brings
mix.
new land in through tile drainage. Some of that may have been pasture land, and the reason it was pasture land in the past was because it was too wet to work in the spring or it wasn't suitable for yields. We've also had advances in crop varieties so that particularly corn and soybeans can be grown further north and further east and at higher elevations. When I moved to Guelph, it was 1985, and I have, for the last 30 years, driven a rural road up to the Flesherton area to canoe in a lake that's up there. And when I first started taking that trip in the 80s, there were people growing corn, but it didn't look that good, and there weren't very many people growing soybeans. And now when I go up there, the corn and the soybeans look great. And that's in part because of the improved varieties that, among others, my colleagues at Guelph have helped develop.
Sure. Okay, in our remaining moments here, let's finish up on something that I suspect both of you agree on. Gord, I'll go to you first on this. Land trusts as a means of making progress on these issues. First of all, what is a land trust?
Well, land trust is simply a sort of not-for-profit organization where they accumulate money or donations of land, and then they hold it in trust for some purpose. It could be for agricultural use. There are agricultural land trusts, or there are increasingly a lot of forest or ecological land trusts where you donate your land to us or you give money, we'll buy somebody's land, and it will be ecologically protected forever. That's the concept of it's a tax-free thing.
Why do you think it's a good vehicle?
It's great. I mean, I give money to a land trust. It's great because, but it's small scale on what should be protected. It targets some very key areas. It tends to, tries to sort of do a triage on the landscape. So yeah, I mean, it's great, wonderful. I encourage everybody to contribute, but we need a lot more of it to do a greater job.
Glenn, do you think it's a very good vehicle for protecting farmland?
It's one of the things that we actually recommended or approved in our study. The reason that I like it is similar to the reason that Gord likes it, but the other reason that I like it is because it's voluntary. That if you want to contribute, Steve, you can. You can contribute money. If you have land, you can contribute land. And then the trust administers that land according to the terms of the trust, ideally in perpetuity.
Who knew economy and ecology could be so similar? There we go. We have you two on and we figure it all out. Gord Miller, former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. Good to have you on Skype from North Bay, Ontario. Glenn Fox, University of Guelph, happy to have you in our studio as well.
My pleasure.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.